Welcome to the Book Faire Podcast. This week will be the last episode before a short hiatus for the holidays. We will be back in January with weekly episodes, as always. But today we have an interview with Shannon Messenger, a look at emerging technology in the publishing industry and the latest book ban news from South Carolina. Let's start with an interview with Shannon Messenger, author of the Keeper of the Lost Cities series. Hello, Shannon. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for letting me talk to you today.
Thank you so much for giving your time. Can you start us off by just introducing yourself for the audience and the book that we'll be discussing today?
Yeah, so I'm Shannon Messenger, and I'm the author of the Keeper of the Lost Cities series. And today I'm here to talk about the second half of the graphic novel adaptation of Book One, which is called Keeper of the Lost Cities, the graphic novel, Part 2.
And what is the story of Keeper of the Lost Cities for people that may not be familiar with it?
So it is the story of Sophie Foster. She is a girl who is telepathic and thinks that it's because she fell and hit her head when she was 5 years old. But then this mysterious boy shows up on her class field trip and shows her that she is actually part of a secret world hidden on our planet. And she has to kind of go live there. And then as she does, she starts to wonder, okay, so why was I hidden away? And, it's just one of those kind of conspiracies that could destroy the world. No pressure on a 12-year-old at all.
And in middle grade and young adult fiction, the magical hidden world is such a common trope. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like in The Keeper of the Lost Cities?
Yeah, so I think it's popular because, who doesn't wish that we could actually belong to a cooler place than where we already are? And I know in Sophie's case, she has always felt super out of place because, she has this ability that she's hiding. And when we meet her, she's 12 years old and she's already a senior in high school. She's just never really felt like she belonged. And so that's really kind of her journey throughout this series, is trying to find somewhere that she truly fits in. Because when she gets to the Lost Cities, she also is different because she grew up in a different place. She has a completely different worldview. So that's kind of her. She's the girl caught between two worlds, trying to figure out, who she wants to be, who she is, which I think is something that a lot of us relate to in that age range, whether we're, finding out that we're not human. Maybe that's not what's going on, but we're also just really trying to go from elementary school to high school, and we're in this weird middle school phase, and we're trying to figure out who we are, and it just kind of models that.
And it's something that just speaks so well to so many young readers, that idea of being an outcast. And there is a character that she meets early on named Fitz. She goes to meet Fitz and his family, and for the first time, Sophie feels like she's getting answers to some of the mysteries before having everything again flipped on her head. Can you talk a little bit about your writing process and including all of these wild turns throughout the story for every time Sophie feels like she has a modicum of security and stability in her life?
Yeah, I always tell, especially young writers, I feel like an author's job is to kind of make life as difficult as possible for their characters as they can, because that's what makes the story interesting. And so in Sophie's case, I knew as I started work on this book that she was just definitely, there was a big story here. And this was something that was really going to unfold, that she was caught up in something massive and huge, and almost scared me as a writer, because I could tell I was embarking on a story that would be like 10 books, and here this is my first series, and I'm like, wow, okay, way to just dive right into the deep end. But I really think that in Sophie's case, she's just really trying to figure out the truth. And in her world, truth is very much a relative thing, because a lot of times the characters who are telling her things, they're not lying. It's what they believe as well, but it's still wrong, because there are secrets and mysteries and conspiracies going on in her world that are slowly unraveling as Sophie is entering this world. It's all kind of coming to a head at the same time.
And so when you were building this book series originally, and you were looking at something that was going to potentially be 10 books long, when it came to pitching this to editors, to publishers, to agents, was there ever any pushback on what the length of the series would be?
Yeah, originally I had a conversation with my agent, and I was just like, she was asking me, so should when I submit this manuscript, should I submit it as yes, there will definitely be a sequel or what? And I told her, I'm like, no, I think this is going to be like 10 books, and she was just like, well, you're a debut author. You're not the daughter of a celebrity or anything like that. So 10-book deal right off the gate, not going to happen. So she said, if I were you, I would start thinking now if there are ways to sort of break the story up. So the original book was sold as a 3-book deal. And the way that I kind of did that was I realized I had multiple villains, but I didn't necessarily need to bring all of them into the story all at once from the beginning. And so that's kind of, we see this, 3-book arc for this one villain. And then there are, other villains that kind of come along as the series goes on.
And so, pitching it originally as a 3-book series, when were you able to finally open that door to expanding it and getting the full story that you wanted to tell?
It was touch and go there, because the series was not like this instant raging bestseller. I'd love to say that it was, but I always say we sort of launched into the world with a whisper instead of a shout. And so, in the beginning, when I went back to my editor and said, "Okay, so we've done, I just finished writing book 3. Can we do a book 4?" And I was hoping for like another 3-book deal, and it was a 1-book deal. And we were kind of there for a little while. Book 4 was a 1-book deal, book 5 was a 1-book deal, and there was a question of whether book 5 would have to be the end. And I just kind of was really torn for a little while. I was like, I don't know how to write this then, because if I write it like it's an end, then there's no opening those doors again. And yet there's so much more story here that could be told. And I finally decided as I was writing book 4 that I was just going to have to make a decision. Was I ending the series, or was I going to just take a gamble and hope that it really took off and that I would get to add more books? And I decided to do that, which was terrifying, but the gamble paid off. By book 5, we hit the New York Times bestseller list. And then it was just kind of like, suddenly they were asking me, how many books do you need, Shannon? We can do this, which was just very weird after so many years of please, can I have another book?
And so, seeing all of these books that take off on Book Talk and social media, where it's an instant debut author YA fantasy bestseller, this is just your experience of trying to get this out. And when it finally did receive traction and you were able to get that extended to the full 10 books that you had planned, what was the response from the readers that you were getting?
Honestly, it was the readers that made it happen. That was kind of what I realized was I could go on social media all day and be like, "Hey, about my book." And people are like, "Yeah, no, we're good. Thanks." It was really readers going to their friends and saying, "We have to talk about this book. I need you to read this." And teachers and librarians getting behind it and putting it on state reading lists, and booksellers hand selling it to their customers. And slowly, bit by bit, all that word of mouth just kind of grew into this grassroots movement. And then I always say I felt like Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill for years and years and years. And then all of a sudden we crested, and then it just went rolling down like this giant snowball. And it's, here we are, 7 million books in print later. And who would have thought my little quiet whisper of a series would be here? But it's because of the readers. And so I am so grateful to them and their enthusiasm, because they made this happen.
And so now that the readers, you've reached that fan base, that those dedicated readers, 7 million books in print, like you said, that's a massive number. And when you were pitching it originally and along the way, was the idea of a graphic novel adaptation something you even considered?
I mean, this is my huge author bucket list. I started out as an art major, and kind of went away from it because I realized I couldn't draw what was in my own imagination as well as how I pictured it. It just never looked as cool on the page as what was in my head. And eventually I realized that I could accomplish it much better if I used words. But so to have someone take my words and translate them into the images that have been living in my head all this time is just the coolest thing. And there's such a wide readership of kids that they kind of come into books and reading through graphic novels before they dive into like because the keeper books are thick. And so getting to have a different format that might be a little bit more reluctant reader friendly is also just really, really huge and awesome. And something that I was so excited when Simon and Schuster was willing to go with me on this journey of, hey, let's take that book and make it into a graphic novel.
And with the graphic novel being perfect for, as you said, reluctant readers, and I think that that is something that graphic novels do really well, is help engaging people who want to read. With such a big series, and with the graphic novel just getting started with the adaptation of the first book, what kind of entry point do you recommend people go into? Do you want them to go from the graphic novel to book 2? Do you want them to reread book 1? Maybe skip ahead to another book?
The reason we did part 1 and part 2 of the graphic novel instead of just really, really condensing it down was because we wanted readers to be able to go from the graphic novel to the prose novels, because graphic novels take years and years and years to make. It so much art and so much work. And so we knew that, work on the book 2 adaptation would be a couple more years at least before that would be hitting the world. And so we really wanted to make sure that everything you needed to know from book 1 is out there in this graphic novel format, so that if you pick up the prose version of book 2, you're not going to be going, wait, I don't understand. This is, why are they referencing moments that I don't remember, And so it ended up being that we had to split the graphic novel into 2 parts, because otherwise it would have just been way too thick and cumbersome. So that's why we get these 2 parts, and we're finally getting to the part 2 of book 1. And yeah, it will flow seamlessly into the prose novels while we wait for the book 2 to be adapted.
Even as a graphic novel with parts 1 and part 2, it is a thick stack of it's a thick stack of book. And as an art major, you will clearly know that drawing, illustrating takes a lot of time. And so the publishers went with a different route for adapting this. Instead of just using one illustrator for both parts, it's split up amongst 2. Can you talk a little bit about that decision and your involvement with working with these illustrators to bring the books to this new medium?
Yeah, I've been a very lucky author that Simon and Schuster has let me be involved in every step of this. I got to be involved with who wrote the adaptation of it. I got to see the artist portfolios and help weigh in on who would be chosen. I got to look at sketches all throughout the way and give feedback. And so it has been truly incredible. And when they came to me and said, in order to not have there just be like a 3 or 4 year gap between part 1 and part 2, we're going to have to take on a second artist so that that person could get started on book 2 while book 1 is still being finished up. And I had this moment of like, oh no, what will that be? And then I realized that, for one thing, we have had dozens of different artists work on the series doing different things. We've done an illustrated annotated edition. We have the cover artist. We've hired out commissioned pieces for different special editions and stuff. And every time, the readers actually seem to get excited about getting to see a new artist's vision of the characters. And so I kind of told Simon Schuster, yeah, I certainly don't want to have it be that we go with a second artist that's such a drastically different style that they would never look like companions to each other. But it's also kind of fun, like, don't make the new artist have to completely try to draw the way that the other artist draws. Like, let's let them draw their way and let them, and let each book be sort of their vision of the series. And it came out really cool because there's enough similarities that I do think if you saw them side by side, you wouldn't necessarily instantly be like, wait, was that 2 different artists? But they each do have their own style and their own feel to it. This new artist is very, very detail oriented. And so she's done these panels with very, very detailed backgrounds, and which was perfect for the second half of the book, because Sophie goes to these places in her world that have so many characters in them and so many details in each of the rooms. And so it was really cool to watch her squeeze. I remember staring at the panels going, how did she fit all of that in? She's a magician.
That's great. And being able to see the different strengths that the separate artists have and their own little takes on the characters, while also keeping everything kind of seamless and consistent amongst the 2 different versions. Are there plans to bring books books 2 and beyond to graphic novel?
I believe so. I know right now they are work very much like Shannon, work on book 10. Right, book 10. So I am deep in the trenches of that, but as far as I know, they are planning to continue on.
And the last question that I'll ask, it's the same question I ask to all guests on the podcast. This is for you to give your final words and also just an introspective, fun question. Shannon, how do you see yourself and the work that you do as a writer?
Oh, well, I mean, I feel like most of the time I feel like a tired writer because I'm always on deadline. But I really get to have my dream job, and I get to write for the part of myself that loved reading the most, because this age range was when books were my everything. And so I really set out just to kind of write the book that would have been the thing that would have made me sneak out of bed to read the next chapter before I fall asleep. Um, because I had to know what was going to happen next. I wanted to write something like that. And it's been so fun to see that there are so many kids out there that connect with the story, and are having that. I hear all the time from parents, yep, I kept telling her to go to bed and she was still up reading. Or I've had teachers say my students were sneaking under their desks and reading. And that is just, I have the best job ever.
Thank you. That was an interview with Shannon Messenger. Her latest book, Volume 2 of the graphic novel adaptation of Keeper of the Lost Cities, is available now. You can learn more about Shannon and her work at shannonmessenger.com. Next, we'll be covering some new releases, but first, if you like the work being done on the Book Faire podcast, there are a number of ways to show your support. First, you can like, comment, favorite, or subscribe wherever you are currently listening to help push the show to new listeners. Second, you can follow the podcast on Blue Sky, Instagram, or on Facebook at Book Faire Pod. You can also go to patreon.com/thebookfair. On Patreon, you can find episodes posted early, as well as links to news sources used throughout the show. Following on Patreon is free. There are no posts hidden behind a paywall, and you can simply add the Patreon RSS feed to your favorite podcast platform. Lastly, the best way to help the Book Faire podcast grow is simply to share it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Now, on with the show. Next, we'll be taking a look at some new releases, starting with The Language of Birds by Jon-Erik Lappano and illustrated by Zach Manbeck. Two kindred spirits connect over adjacent interests in this sensitive interpersonal portrait from Lappano and Manbeck. Mira, depicted with pale skin and brown hair, has always had a special rapport with birds. She paid attention and learned their language. Humans, however, are another matter. So Mira sits alone beneath a maple tree at recess, feeding seeds to a crow. Then brown-skinned, blue-haired Jad, an introverted artist who relates to trees as Mira does to birds, joins her class. When Mira tries to say hello, her words flew to the sky until the crow creates an opening. As Jad draws a chalk tree on the pavement at recess, the corvid nudges a cardinal, which inspires Mira to add its image to one of the branches. Jad approves, and swooping artwork depicts their blooming collaboration as an expansive, bird-filled forest that glows with greens, yellows, and blues. In a lyrical finale, Mira bows to the crow with arms outspread, grateful for now having two companions who truly see her. This book is recommended for ages 4 to 8. Next is The Snowman Code by Simon Stevenson and illustrated by Reggie Brown. In this warm children's debut by Stevenson, the longest winter in more than 300 years leads to a tween encountering a sentient snow person. To avoid bullies, 10-year-old Blessing ditches school, passing the time by traversing the streets of London. She feels that this is the only solution to her problem, since she believes she can't ask her mother for help, because Mom gets sad in the winter. Blessing worries that her finding out about the bullies could make Mom so sad that she'll be hospitalized again. During her wanderings, the youth discovers a lopsided snow person with bottle cap eyes and a potato nose, an icy being that, to her shock, can talk. Snowman Albert informs her that he has lived through 627 winters, often being reborn several times around the world within a standard year. According to the Snowman Code, he must help children in need, and blessing requires aid. And so does Albert. Nature-centered whimsy and the duo's interpersonal banter brighten a somber plot that also touches on issues surrounding depression. Digitally rendered black and white illustrations by Reggie Brown depict a racially diverse human cast across charming winter scenes. This book is recommended for ages 8 to 12. And the final title for this week is The Uninvited by Nancy Banks. In this immersive debut, Banks sets a familiar premise: a vampire terrorizing unsuspected teens after dark, against a quaint Parisian backdrop. Arriving from Oregon ahead of her easygoing and devoted father, 17-year-old Tosh Reeves settles into the father-daughter duo's Paris apartment alone. Upon befriending and immediately crushing on fellow American Nick Wallace, Tosh is absorbed into Nick's friend group, which includes incisive street artist Noor City, cigarette-smoking Martine Sardou, and her boyfriend Youssef Richadi, and artist Lebec, a self-important graffiti painter of pigeons. Though reports of a vampire attacking women circulate the city, the menace remains mostly in the background for Tosh as she busies herself integrating into Parisian life. A group trip to the catacombs, during which Tosh and Noor come into conflict with Lebec after standing up to his previous bullying, sets off events that threaten to change Tosh forever. As more is revealed about Paris's unknown assailant, Banks utilizes the novel's supernatural elements surrounding immortality and vampiric power to deliver an insightful cautionary tale that emphasizes the importance of consent and respecting others' boundaries. A leisurely start centers Tosh's developing friendships with the vampiric components, supplying an ominous undercurrent throughout this tidy read for francophiles who enjoy a paranormal bent to realistic contemporary tales. The cast is racially diverse, and this book is recommended for ages 12 and up. Now let's take a look at some headlines, starting with a South Carolina library banning books with gender identity for minors. York County Library in South Carolina has just banned books about gender identity from areas in the library meant for children and teens. This stems from a state budget that includes provisions requiring libraries restrict access to prurient books for patrons under 18. This means that South Carolina is leading the United States in state-sanctioned book bans. Greenville implemented a blanket book ban on trans books in the teen area of their library last year, leading to a lawsuit filed by patrons with the support of the ACLU. Now, York County is using a similar policy, as well as announcing that they will no longer procure any materials for the children's and teens collections altogether. After being called out for copying Greenville's policy, which again led to a lawsuit from the ACLU, York County Library rephrased the policy, which passed on December 11th. The policy calls out the use of reviews from ratedbooks.org, a page run by censorship groups similar to Moms for Liberty. The juvenile or children's section mentions prohibiting sexually explicit content, which isn't a problem. The next line, however, says, quote, "Books addressing topics on gender identity or other mature themes may be excluded from the juvenile collection and placed in another collection," end quote. The wording is of concern here, where the concept of gender is being grouped with mature themes. As much as it can bother conservatives, queer and trans adults were once queer and trans children, and they deserve access to age-appropriate stories that represent them. On top of representation for marginalized groups, for cis or heteronormative readers, these stories instill empathy and teach tolerance for others. The narrative pushed by pro-censorship advocates is that books discussing trans characters or by queer authors are encouraging some kind of harm for young people. The only harm being done to children related to book bans is happening to members of the marginalized communities, like the LGBTQ+. Book bans are not about taking inappropriate content out of schools. They are about using the government and using legislative and administrative power to remove references to a specific class of people. Their message is clear. If you are not straight or are trans, they do not want you to be seen in society. If you have a family, they don't want your family to know that you are a valid person. Or if there are children struggling with their gender identity, they want those children to be swept under the rug. Advocating for the freedom to read is advocating for equitable access to information and stories to help people learn concepts that aren't broadly taught. Inclusivity protects the most vulnerable people in our country. Right now, there are children that are dealing with rates of poor mental health and self-harm higher than the average for their age group. As a community and as a country, I believe that we need to protect all people, no matter how small the group is. Next, a look at some interesting technology bringing accessibility to education. There is an ongoing debate whether audiobooks count as reading. You're either perfectly fine with allowing people that use audiobooks to say they read something, or you are wrong. Another format typically used for picture books is a dedicated device sold as part of the book with a built-in speaker for reading along. In the last few years, there have been two companies that are expanding on this concept: Vox Books and Wonder Books, with Wonder Books being a line of products sold by the media group Playaway. Vox is using a similar format to existing books sold with a soundboard attached and largely targeting picture books and early reader titles. However, Wonder Books is taking a more holistic approach to the new technology. They sell popular titles from major publishers with a small triangular piece on the cover with buttons and a headphone jack, as well as a speaker. Pause, play, volume, speed, and chapter controls, as well as unique functions, like questions read by the narrator about the title, are all included. Currently, due to special arrangements from publishers, Vox and Wonder Books titles are only available to schools and libraries. Wonder Books also have partnerships with correctional facilities and healthcare institutions. Now, why correctional facilities? Because Wonder Books offers titles beyond early readers, including middle grade, young adult, and general fiction. There are also titles available in other languages, and these books don't require an internet connection, which sets them apart from audiobook services like Libby. The unique blend of printed media and audio brings a level of accessibility for those that struggle with comprehension, literacy, or dyslexia. Check with your school or local library to see if there are any Vox Books or Wonder Books available to check out. If they're not, Playaway has a storefront available to browse. Currently, to purchase, you need to contact a sales representative, and sales are limited to schools and libraries. This segment has no affiliation with Wonder Books. I genuinely think that this sounds like interesting technology and is something that is worth looking into if you are an educator or a librarian. Next, another quick story about book bans from an unusual source. Typically, I would advocate for reading on ebooks with dedicated devices like a Kindle or on a tablet. However, Metropolitan Detention Center in Albuquerque is moving to list paper books as contraband. Having the option to use an e-reader for inmates is very progressive. However, making the shift all at once and completely banning paper books is counterintuitive to protecting human rights, even when we are talking about prisoners. One member of the prison's Civilian Advisory Board and former inmate said, quote, "I find the argument that people hide contraband in books is unreliable." Another member in a meeting we had a couple of months ago said, "Well, they had those mattresses, right? Are we going to take those away next?" End quote. Outside the absurd contraband argument, the book ban from the Metropolitan Detention Center has led to a lawsuit from the Human Rights Defense Center. There is precedent for prisoners to have a right to receive books and magazines via mail, either from citizens, publishers, or vendors. MDC has been sued in the past for a similar reason, resulting in a settlement requiring the center to allow books to inmates. Since July, the lawsuit alleges 160 titles were sent to inmates at MDC and returned without explanation. And the last story for this week: the Supreme Court will not be hearing a lower court's appeal for a book ban case. In May, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in favor of the defendants, overturning a previous injunction over a book ban that happened in Llano, Texas. That's a lot of legal flip-flop language, but the short version is this. Titles with LGBTQ+ themes were removed from Llano Public Library, A lawsuit had been filed, and the county fired board members, replacing them with pro-censorship members. The lawsuit has risen to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, where the decision has been upheld in favor of Llano, stating that the library was not in the wrong. An appeal was made for the Supreme Court of the United States, the highest court in the land, which was rejected. This means they will not be hearing the case, and the Fifth Circuit Court's ruling is final. Book Riot and other sites following this case have called this a major blow for the freedom to read. However, I am slightly more optimistic. While this means that Llano, Texas has been handed the confirmation that restricting titles purely for containing LGBTQ+ themes, there are more court cases from other states as we speak. More importantly, if this case had gone to the Supreme Court, their decision would have set precedent. This would mean that the public libraries all across the United States would be protected in removing LGBTQ+ books. Undoing that much damage would take decades. So while Llano Public Library has fallen under the control of a conservative board, there is still hope that censorship will still largely happen on a local level. The fight for the freedom to read is ongoing. There are other places where small groups are pushing their agenda to erase certain information from public access. The government should not be in control of what types of books the community has access to. Book bans targeting juvenile collections is just the canary in the coal mine. I am fighting for the freedom to read before it extends into what is legally able to be published, what can be said online, and what can be done in public. This will conclude another episode of the Book Faire Podcast. For the holidays, I will be taking my usual break from the show, but we will be back in January with more episodes and weekly interviews, more diverse books, and more book banning news. If you like the work being done on the show, you can follow on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Facebook at Book Faire Pod, or you can find episodes posted early on patreon.com/thebookfair. Following on Patreon is free, there are no posts hidden behind a paywall, and you can add the RSS feed to your preferred podcast platform. Thank you so very much for listening. Merry Christmas, and as always, I'll talk to you next time.